Commander, welcome back.
Thank you. I appreciate the reception. Shall we?
3 years ago, she sent him one message. 1. It was 2:47 in the morning. She was sitting on the edge of her bunk in her Navy uniform, her deployment bag already zipped and waiting by the door. Her hands were shaking, not from fear of war, not from fear of the ocean or the mission or the unknown. She was shaking because of him. She typed the message. Deleted it. Typed it again. Stared at it for 6 full minutes. Then she pressed send. He never replied. She deployed the next morning and spent 12 months on open water telling herself she was over it. Over him. Over the way he looked at her like she was the only solid thing in a world made of smoke and danger. She told herself she had imagined everything, the late nights, the laughter, the electricity that crackled between them like something alive. She came back a decorated officer. Harder. Sharper. Unbothered. Or so she thought. Because tonight, at a high-security charity gala in Seoul that she was assigned to protect, she just walked into the room. And he is standing right there. Jeon Hae-jun. The most feared man in South Korea's criminal underworld. The man whose file she has read 17 times. The man whose voice she still hears in her dreams. And he is already looking at her. Like he never stopped. Before we begin, my mum said this video cannot reach 10,000 views and 1,000 subscribers. Let's prove her wrong. Smash that like button, subscribe right now, and drop in the comments where you are watching from. Now let's get into this story. Lieutenant Commander Adwoa Mensah had a rule about wearing heels to assignments. She didn't. Heels were impractical. Heels were slow. Heels were the kind of thing worn by women who weren't expecting to have to disarm a 6-foot mercenary between the appetizer and the main course. But tonight her commanding officer had looked at her tactical boots, looked at the elegant Seoul skyline visible through the briefing room window, and said, with the exhausted patience of a man who had given up arguing with her years ago, Mensah. It's a gala. Please. So. Heels. Black, 3 inches, and she had already mentally catalogued exactly how much damage they could do if thrown at someone's skull. She adjusted the earpiece tucked beneath her natural hair, a full, gorgeous crown of coils she refused to flatten for any assignment, and stepped out of the black SUV onto the marble entrance of the Grand Hyatt Seoul. The December air was sharp and cold, carrying the scent of snow that hadn't fallen yet. Around her, the city glittered like a circuit board come alive. Mensah, confirm position, Lieutenant Park said through the comms. North entrance. I'm in. She smoothed the front of her floor-length navy gown, dark, of course, always dark, and smiled at the door attendant like she attended galas in foreign countries every weekend of her life. Also, for the record, my feet are already suffering and I've been on the ground for 4 minutes. Copy that. Stop complaining. I don't complain, Park. I provide status updates. She heard him laugh despite himself. This was the thing about Adwoa Mensah that her superiors simultaneously loved and found deeply exhausting. She was the most competent officer in her division, and she absolutely knew it, and she also never let anyone forget it. But she said it with such cheerful, dimpled confidence that it was nearly impossible to be properly angry with her. She had grown up in Accra, Ghana, the third of 5 children, in a house where you either learned to be quick with your words or got drowned out entirely. Her mother was a retired school teacher who could silence a room with one raised eyebrow. Her father was a retired military officer who had once told her, when she was 8 years old and had just beaten every boy in her class at a foot race, "Don't run so fast, Adwoa. Boys don't like to be embarrassed." She had looked up at him with her round, serious eyes and said, "Good thing I'm not running for the boys, Daddy." He had stared at her for a long moment and then burst out laughing, and that had been that. He was the one who drove her to the Navy recruitment office 12 years later. She moved through the lobby with the quiet efficiency that was her trademark, eyes cataloguing exits, scanning faces, clocking weapons that weren't there yet but could be. Her mission tonight was straightforward. The Ghanaian Deputy Minister of Trade was attending this gala as part of a diplomatic visit to Seoul, and Adwoa had been embedded in the Joint Protection Detail. Straightforward. Professional. Routine. That was what she told herself. What she did not tell herself, what she had been very carefully not telling herself for the 6 weeks since this assignment had landed on her desk and she had opened the supporting intelligence files and seen the guest list, was his name. Jeon Hae-jun. Founder and head of the Jeon Syndicate. 34 years old. 6'1". Net worth classified. Known associates, half of Seoul's financial elite, several members of government, and at least 3 foreign intelligence services who would very much like to know what he knows. Criminal record, officially clean. Unofficially, the man was considered the most elegant predator in a city full of them. He was also, the file noted, the primary donor behind tonight's event. She had stared at that sentence for a long time. Then she had submitted her assignment acceptance and not thought about it again. She was a professional. She stepped into the main ballroom and the room opened up before her. Soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, hundreds of Seoul's most powerful and beautiful people moving through warm golden light like they had been placed there by a set designer. Her eyes did what they always did. They swept the room in sections. Methodical. Practiced. North corner. Clear. West wall. Clear. Center floor. She stopped. Her heart, which had maintained a perfectly steady 62 beats per minute through 3 combat deployments, 2 hostage extractions, and 1 very alarming incident involving a rocket launcher off the coast of Djibouti, did something it had absolutely no business doing. It stuttered. Because there, standing at the center of the room like the entire party had organized itself around him, was John Hejun. He was wearing black, of course he was wearing black, and he was speaking to a small group of men who were clearly very important and were also clearly very nervous in his presence. He had one hand in his pocket. His posture was perfectly relaxed. There was a faint curve to his mouth that wasn't quite a smile, the way a blade isn't quite a threat until it is. He was exactly as she remembered. And then, as if he had felt the specific weight of her gaze across a room full of 300 people, he turned. His eyes found hers instantly. The noise of the ballroom didn't fade, that was a lie people told in stories. The music kept playing. The conversations kept buzzing. Someone laughed too loudly near the bar. But something shifted. The air, maybe. Or her. His expression didn't change. Not exactly. But something moved behind his eyes. Something quick and dark and complicated, and then the corner of his mouth lifted, just slightly, into something she absolutely refused to call a smile. She looked away first. "Park," she said quietly into her comms, her voice impressively steady for a woman whose hands had just curled into fists at her sides. "Confirm the deputy minister's current position." She was a professional. She was fine. She was absolutely, completely, entirely fine. The thing about John Hejun was that he was not supposed to exist the way he did. Men in his position, men who had built empires in shadow, who moved money and power through the hidden architecture of cities, who could end careers or begin wars with a single phone call, those men were not supposed to be charming. They were not supposed to have a dry, devastating sense of humor. They were not supposed to sit across from a Ghanaian Navy lieutenant at a terrible hotel bar in Busan at 2 in the morning, 3 years ago, and make her laugh so hard she spilled her drink. They were certainly not supposed to look at her the way he had looked at her. Like she was a problem he wanted to spend the rest of his life solving. Adwoa kept her eyes on the room and her breathing even and reminded herself, professionally, that she was not here to think about Busan. She was here to do a job. The Deputy Minister, Honorable Kwame Asante, was currently holding court near the east side of the room, shaking hands and performing the specific kind of hearty diplomatic laughter that politicians used as currency. He was surrounded by his 2 assigned bodyguards, capable men, she had assessed them, and seemed to be having a genuinely lovely time. Good. He was safe. She could move. She drifted toward the bar, ordered sparkling water with the confidence of someone ordering something much stronger, and turned to face the room with her back to the counter. John Hejun was no longer in the center of the floor. Her pulse ticked up exactly once before she found him, closer now, maybe 30 feet away, wrapped in a conversation with a Japanese diplomat whose body language suggested the conversation was above his pay grade. Hejun was speaking quietly, almost lazily, the way powerful people spoke when they wanted you to remember that they never needed to raise their voice. He was beautiful. She had always thought so, and she had always found that thought extremely inconvenient. Sharp jaw. Dark eyes that carried a kind of stillness she had never fully decoded. A mouth made for either devastating honesty or devastating lies, and she had never been entirely sure which she was getting. He wore his authority the way he wore his clothes, effortlessly, like he had never considered that it could be otherwise. She watched him laugh at something the diplomat said, a real laugh, quick and bright, gone almost before it arrived, and felt something tighten in her chest. Stop it, Adwoa. She thought about the message. She always tried not to, and she always did anyway. 2:47 a.m. The words had taken her 20 minutes to type and 6 minutes to send and exactly 3 years to stop burning. I leave in 4 hours. I didn't want to go without saying, whatever this is, whatever we were doing, it mattered to me. You mattered to me. That probably makes me an idiot, but I'm a decorated idiot, so at least there's that. Stay safe, Hejun. He had read it. She knew he had read it because she had watched the checkmarks change. He had been online. He had been right there. And he had said nothing. She had deployed at 0600, stood on the deck of her ship as South Korea's coast disappeared behind her, and promised herself with the particular cold clarity of a woman who had chosen a life that required it that she would not cry, she would not pine, and she would absolutely never send a message like that again. She had kept all 3 promises. She was excellent at keeping promises. It was one of her best qualities. You cut your hair. The voice came from directly beside her, low and calm and achingly familiar, and Adwoa, Lieutenant Commander Adwoa Mensah, who had once talked a weapons smuggler off a ledge in 2 languages while managing a navigational emergency, barely managed not to flinch. She turned slowly. He was closer than she expected. Close enough that she caught the faint edge of his cologne, something dark and precise, cedar and something colder underneath. His eyes were doing that thing they had always done, that careful, total attention that made you feel like the only person in any room. She hated it. She had missed it so much it was embarrassing. Hejun, she said, and was proud of how her voice landed. Level. Easy. The voice of a woman who had not spent 20 minutes composing a message he ignored. Adwoa. He said her name the way he always had, getting every syllable right, unhurried, like the word deserved the space it took up. You look professionally appropriate for the event, she said. His mouth curved. I was going to say extraordinary. I know. I was giving you a better option. He laughed. It was soft, and it was real, and it landed somewhere beneath her sternum like a small, warm detonation. Do not, she told herself firmly. I didn't know you would be here, he said. I'm assigned to the deputy minister's detail. She sipped her water. Which means I'm working, which means this is a professional conversation, which means I owe you an answer. The words landed between them, quiet and precise. She went very still. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only crack in the composure. The message. 3 years ago. His eyes didn't leave hers. I read it. I know you read it, she said, and was impressed by her own steadiness. I should have answered. Yes, she agreed pleasantly. You should have. I had reasons. I'm sure you did. Adwoa. Hejun. She turned to face him fully, and thou it was, that thing that happened between them, that gravity, that impossible pull. She kept her face calm and her eyes steady and said, with great professionalism, I have a job to do tonight. And this conversation, she gestured vaguely at the charged air between them, is not the conversation I am having right now. He looked at her for a long moment. After, he said. It wasn't a question. She considered denying him. It was the sensible choice. The clean choice. We'll see, she said instead, and turned back to the room. She heard him exhale behind her, something that was almost a laugh. She kept her eyes forward and tried very hard not to smile. John Hejun had learned 3 things about Adwoa Mensah in the span of 30 seconds at a hotel bar in Busan 3 years ago. 1. She had a laugh that could reorganize the architecture of a room. 2. She was the most dangerously perceptive person he had ever met, and he had spent his life surrounded by dangerous people. 3. She was going to be a problem. He had been right about all 3. He moved back through the gala with the same easy authority he carried everywhere, stopping to exchange a few words here, acknowledging a nod there, performing the elaborate social choreography that his position required, and kept her in his peripheral vision the entire time. Not obviously. He was too practiced for obviously. But she was a fixed point in the room the way she had always been, steady, bright, impossible to ignore, and completely unbothered by his existence in a way that had been, from the very beginning, the most attractive thing about her. Most people in his world watched him carefully. They smiled too quickly and agreed too readily and laughed at things that weren't funny. They wanted something from him, or feared something from him, or both. Adwoa, when he had sat down beside her at that bar in Busan, two strangers in a hotel full of defense contractors and diplomats, both of them clearly pretending they weren't there for reasons they couldn't explain, had looked at him and said, without any particular ceremony, "You have the posture of someone who's used to people moving out of his way." He had blinked. Genuinely blinked. "Is that a problem?" "Just an observation." She'd returned to her drink. "I'm Adwoa." "Hejun. Are you here for the conference?" "No. Neither am I." She tilted her head and studied him with those extraordinary dark eyes. "What are you here for?" "Business." Vague. Intentionally. She had smiled at that, small, amused, not impressed, and said, "Fair enough," and gone back to her drink, and that had been that, except it hadn't been that at all, because 4 hours had evaporated between them in what felt like 20 minutes, and when she had laughed at something he said, fully, genuinely, the kind of laugh that had no calculation in it, he had felt something shift in him like tectonic plates. He did not do this. He did not sit in hotel bars with women he'd just met and talk until last call. He did not find himself leaning forward because he wanted to hear what someone would say next. He did not. He had caught himself and pulled back, and she had noticed, because she noticed everything, and she had said simply, "Too much." No, he had said, and meant it. But he had known, even then, what he was. What he came from. What he would eventually have to go back to. He had spent 3 more weeks finding reasons to be in the same city as her. He had called it coincidence. She had never believed that for a moment and had told him so with a cheerfulness that delighted him. And then her message had come. He read it standing in the middle of his office at 2:47 in the morning, having just concluded a meeting that involved 3 men he trusted completely and information that had chilled him in ways very little could anymore. There was a threat, specific, credible, aimed not at him but at people connected to him. People who were seen with him. People who mattered to him. He had stood there with her words on his screen and done the calculation he never wanted to do. She was Navy. She was about to deploy. She would be on the water, unreachable, safe, away. If he answered, if he opened that door, she would come back to it. To him. And coming back to him meant stepping into a world that would not be kind to her. He hadn't answered because it was the safest thing for her. He had spent 3 years telling himself that. He was starting to suspect it had also been the cowardly thing. He plucked a glass of champagne from a passing tray, took a single sip, and found Adwoa across the room again. She was speaking quietly into her comms, sharp-eyed and focused, doing her job with the calm efficiency that had apparently not dimmed 1 degree in 3 years. She was also, somehow, still the most beautiful woman in the room, and he'd counted. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. His second-in-command, Shin Junho, "We have a complication. East Corridor. Now." He set down his champagne. Complications, he could handle. He had been handling them his entire adult life. It was the woman in the dark gown, currently pretending she had not just completely rearranged his evening by walking through a door, that he had no idea what to do with. He moved toward the East Corridor, and because the universe apparently had a sense of humor, Adwoa's voice came through the open doorway before he reached it, low, authoritative, already assessing, "I've got movement in the East Corridor, possible breach, I'm on it." They reached the doorway at the same moment. Looked at each other. "Stand down, Lieutenant Commander," he said, with exquisite composure. "Get behind me, sir," she said, in exactly the same tone. A beat of perfect silence. "I'm not getting behind you," he said. "And I'm not standing down." She pulled something from beneath the elegant fold of her gown, a compact, efficient weapon that had absolutely no business being at a gala, with a matter-of-factness that was the most attractive thing he had ever seen. "So we do this together or you stay here. Your choice." He looked at her for exactly 1 second. "Together," he said. She nodded once. "Try to keep up." It was a scout. Not an assassin, not a breach team, a single scout, young and poorly trained, who had clearly drawn the short straw in whatever operation had sent him here and was now deeply regretting it, pressed against the corridor wall with Adwoa's forearm at his throat and the absolute whites of his eyes showing. "Who sent you?" she said pleasantly. He said something in rapid Korean. Adwoa looked at Hejun. Translation. "He says he doesn't know what you're talking about." Tell him I'm a naval officer with 3 combat deployments, fluent in the universal language of consequences, and I would love for him to try that again. Hejun translated, more or less. The scout tried something less stupid. It took about 4 minutes and the particular brand of calm, cheerful menace that Adwoa deployed with the ease of someone who had been doing it for years, but they got what they needed. A name, a hired group, a target, not the deputy minister as she had first thought, but Hejun. Someone wanted him dead tonight. She filed this information away without reacting to it, zip-tied the scout's wrists with a cable she produced from somewhere in her gown that Hejun absolutely could not account for, handed him off to her comms team with a brief and professional explanation, and then turned to face Hejun in the now empty corridor. Someone wants you dead, she said. It happens. Tonight specifically. Less common but not unprecedented. She stared at him. You're very calm about this. I'm always calm. He paused. You extracted a weapon and zip ties from a formal gown. I have a system. I want to know about the system. Focus, Hejun. Someone in that room hired someone to hurt you tonight. That means your security has a leak, your guest list has a problem, or someone got very lucky with access. I need you to have dinner with me. She stopped. I'm sorry. Tomorrow. He said it with complete equanimity, like he hadn't just been handed his own death warrant 30 seconds ago. There's a restaurant in Itaewon. Excellent food. Private room. No one will try to kill either of us. You don't know that. I'll increase security. Hejun. She said his name with the patient deliberateness of a woman running low on patience. There is an active threat on your life, which my people will handle tonight. He tilted his head. I spent 3 years not answering you. The least I can do is buy you dinner. She looked at him for a long moment. In the warm light of the corridor he looked, God help her, devastating, and also somehow like a man who had just said something true at the expense of something that cost him. I haven't agreed to hear your reasons, she said. I know. And dinner doesn't buy you forgiveness. I'm not asking for forgiveness. His voice dropped, just slightly. I'm asking for time. The comms crackled in her ear. The deputy minister was fine. The event was being quietly locked down. Her team had it handled. She had, professionally, a window. She should not use it like this. One dinner, she said. Something moved in his eyes, quick and warm and then composed again. One dinner. And you will tell me the truth. Yes. All of it. A pause, brief, the kind that meant he was deciding how afraid to be. Yes. Fine. She straightened, smoothed the front of her gown, and walked back toward the ballroom with the calm of a woman who had not just agreed to have dinner with the most dangerous man in Seoul. Now let's go make sure your other guests don't get murdered. Try to keep up. She heard him follow. She did not hear him smile. But she knew he was. The restaurant was called Seokyung, tucked behind a wooden gate in a part of Itaewon that didn't appear on the kind of maps tourists used, and it was perfect. The private room was small and warm, cedar-paneled, with a low table and cushioned floor seating and a single paper lantern casting everything in amber. Through a latticed window, Seoul's lights blinked and breathed like a living thing. Adwoa looked around the room, looked at the table already set with 2 cups of barley tea and a succession of small dishes she didn't have names for yet, and said, You made a reservation before I said yes. I made a reservation before I walked over to you at the gala. She sat down across from him. That's presumptuous. That's optimistic. He settled into his seat with the ease of a man entirely comfortable on the floor. I prefer optimistic. And if I'd said no, then I would have had an excellent dinner alone and spent the evening reconsidering my life choices. She laughed, surprised into it, the real one, and watched his entire face change in response. That was the thing about Jeon Hejun that his file absolutely failed to capture. When he was pleased, truly pleased, he looked like a different man. Younger. Lighter. Like the authority and the watchfulness lifted by a few degrees, and underneath was someone she might have met in any other life. Start from the beginning, she said, wrapping both hands around her tea. He looked at her across the table, and for the first time since the gala, she saw something in his face that wasn't composure. I read your message, he said. I was in my office. It was 2:47 and I had just finished a meeting about a threat, not to me, to my network. People connected to me were being targeted. People who were seen with me. He paused. I had known for about 3 weeks that the situation was escalating. 3 weeks, she said quietly. The 3 weeks before you deployed. She processed this. You knew someone might come after people close to you. Yes. And you decided that the appropriate response was to disappear. I decided that the appropriate response was to not give anyone a reason to look at you. Silence. The lantern swayed almost imperceptibly in a current of air. That was my choice to make, she said. Her voice was level but her jaw was set, and he recognized it, the controlled anger of a woman who was too honest to pretend she wasn't furious. You don't get to decide my risk threshold, Hajun. I know. I am a naval officer. I have been in active combat situations. I have made risk calculations that would. I know, Adwoa. His voice was low. I know who you are. That wasn't the point. Then what was the point? He was quiet for a moment. The silence had weight in it, not the comfortable silence they had found in Busan, but something rawer. The point, he said carefully, was that you were the first person in a very long time that he stopped. Tried again. My world is dangerous. I have made peace with that. What I had not accounted for was meeting someone who made me want something outside it. He met her eyes. And I panicked. The word sat between them. Panicked. John Hajun, the most feared man in Seoul's underworld, who had faced down rivals and law enforcement and 3 decades of impossible decisions, was looking at her and saying panicked. The anger softened. Not gone, she was Adwoa Mensah, she would come back to the anger, they would have more words about the choice he'd made without her, but underneath it, something warmer pushed through. You absolute idiot, she said. He blinked. You could have said any of this. One message. One sentence. I have a situation, give me time. You had my number, Hajun. I know. But you said nothing, and I spent 12 months on a ship in the Indian Ocean convincing myself I had imagined the whole thing. You didn't imagine it. And don't think I don't know that, because I do, I am very perceptive, but it would have been nice. You didn't imagine any of it. His voice was quiet and certain and she stopped talking. Not 1 second of it. The lantern swayed. Outside, Seoul hummed. Okay, she said finally. Okay. I'm not over it. But she considered, in the vicinity of it. She picked up a piece of something delicate and braised from the nearest dish and put it in her mouth and her eyes went slightly wide. Oh. That's extraordinary. He smiled. John Hajun, she said, pointing at him with her chopstick, if you use incredible food to emotionally manipulate me, I will absolutely let you. Noted, he said, and reached for his own chopsticks, and the evening unspooled from there like something that had been waiting to happen for 3 years. She told him, on the second night, about growing up in Accra. They were on the rooftop of his building, which was not as alarming a sentence as it sounded, as the rooftop was heated and landscaped and had a view of Seoul that made her understand, briefly, why people wrote poetry, and she was wrapped in a blanket that was probably worth more than her first 3 paychecks, nursing a glass of something warm and Korean and deeply good. My mother, she said, believed that anything worth doing was worth doing loudly. She sang while she cooked. She argued with the television. She laughed at full volume in public spaces. She smiled at the city. I used to be embarrassed by it. Now I think it was the bravest thing I've ever seen. You're like her, he said. She looked at him. How do you mean? You take up the exact right amount of space. He said it simply, like it was a fact. Most people either shrink or overcorrect. You don't. She was quiet for a moment. That, she said, might be the nicest thing anyone has said to me in recent memory. I have more. Save them. I don't want to get used to you too quickly. He looked at her with those dark eyes and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. He told her, on the 3rd night, about his father. They were in a different restaurant. His city seemed to have infinite restaurants, all of them perfect, as if Seoul had been specifically designed to support whatever this was becoming, and somewhere between the 2nd course and the 3rd he set down his chopsticks and said, My father ran the syndicate before me. She didn't react. She had read the file. She knew. He died when I was 22, he continued. The succession it wasn't clean. There were people who thought a 22-year-old wasn't ready. They weren't wrong. His voice was even, but the evenness was the point. It took me 2 years to establish control. That period was not. You don't have to. She reached across the table without thinking and touched his hand briefly. Quick, light, just enough to mean I'm here. You don't have to detail it. He looked down at her hand, now withdrawn. I know, he said. I wanted to. She held his gaze. Then tell me what you want me to know. And he did. On the 4th night, they didn't go to a restaurant. He texted her an address at 7 p.m., a warehouse district in Mapo, not the kind of area that appeared on romantic itineraries, and she had arrived to find a loading dock transformed improbably into something wonderful, a projector screen, 2 chairs, a small table of food, and a film she had mentioned in passing on the first night that she had been trying to watch for 6 years. She stood in the doorway of this absurd, perfect setup and looked at him. You listened, she said. He looked faintly embarrassed, a micro-expression, gone almost instantly, but she was watching. You said you hadn't seen it. Hejun. She was smiling and trying not to. This is extremely romantic. It's just a film. In a warehouse. With better snacks than a cinema. She walked in, sat down in one of the chairs, looked at the table of food, which included, she noticed, the Ghanaian keluele she had described to him on day 2 as her greatest comfort food, somehow sourced in Seoul, and felt something in her chest rearrange itself quietly and permanently. You're going to be very difficult to stop liking, she informed him. He sat down beside her. Close enough that their arms almost touched. Good, he said. She pressed play. It was on the 6th day that someone tried again. She was leaving his building. They had been working through the suspect list from the gala, because she had inserted herself into his security situation with a professionalism that he had first resisted and then admitted was an enormous relief, and she clocked the car before she even reached the street. Wrong plates. Parked facing the wrong direction for that side of the road. Engine running. She didn't break stride. Hejun. She kept her voice low, conversational, the voice she used when she needed him to listen without reacting. Black sedan, north side, 12 o'clock. Don't look. He didn't look. He had been taking her seriously since the gala with a speed that she found deeply gratifying. How many? Minimum 2. Possibly 3. She took his arm with the ease of a woman who had absolutely not been cataloguing the particular warmth of his arm for days. Laugh at something. He made a sound that was a reasonable approximation of a laugh. Good. Walk me to the corner and then I need you to go back inside. Absolutely not. Hejun. I'm not sending you out there alone. I'm not, she started, and then the sedan's door opened, and there was no more time for the conversation. What followed was 40 seconds of efficient, focused chaos, at the end of which there were 2 men zip-tied in an alley. She really did have a system, and Adwoa had a shallow graze on her forearm that stung considerably and was making her more annoyed than worried. Hejun was looking at it with an expression she had not seen on him before. It's fine, she said. You're bleeding. It grazed me. It's fine. Adwoa. His voice had dropped into something lower, more careful. He reached out and took her arm, gently, with both hands, tilting it toward the light. His thumb moved along her skin, just below the graze, and her whole body registered the touch like a system reboot. I'm fine, she said again, more quietly. He looked up from her arm and his face was very close and the expression on it was not composed at all. If something had happened to you, he said. It didn't. If it had. Hejun. She turned her arm slightly, just enough to hold his hand instead. Look at me. He did. I have been protecting myself, and occasionally other people, for a very long time. I am very good at it. You do not need to fall apart because someone grazed me. I'm not falling apart. You look like you're falling apart. I look, he said, with great dignity, like a man who is holding himself together. She laughed. Couldn't help it. He exhaled at the sound of it like something releasing. Come inside, he said. Let me deal with that properly. It doesn't need. Adwoa. She looked at him, This man, this ridiculous, dangerous, careful man who had sourced Ghanaian food in Seoul and set up a movie in a warehouse and was currently holding her hand in an alley with the intensity of someone who had made a decision about her, and said simply, "Okay." They went inside. He cleaned the grays with focused, gentle hands and said nothing, which was somehow louder than anything he could have said, and she sat on the counter of his kitchen and watched him and thought about all the versions of this moment that hadn't happened, all the parallel lives where she'd never come to Seoul, or he'd answered her message, or neither of them had been in that bar in Busan. Hejun. He looked up. "Come here," she said. He went still for exactly one breath. Then he stepped forward, into the small space between the counter and where she sat, and she reached up and took his face in both her hands the way she had been thinking about for 6 days, and kissed him. He kissed her back immediately, deeply, with none of the hesitation she might have expected from a man who had spent 3 years walking away from her. His hands found her waist. She felt the counter at her back and him at her front, and she felt, with vivid clarity, that her heart was doing several things at once and all of them were appropriate. When they pulled apart, they were both breathing differently. That, she said, with admirable composure, was a significant development. "Yes," he agreed, hands still at her waist. "I want to acknowledge it and also not lose my entire mind about it. Also reasonable." "Okay." She exhaled. "Okay." He smiled at her, full, real, the rare one, and she decided immediately that she wanted to spend considerable time earning that smile again. She had 9 days left in Seoul. She was trying not to count them, but she was absolutely counting them, which was annoying, because she was a Dwoa Mensa and she did not count days. The assignment was winding down. The deputy minister had concluded his diplomatic visit. The threat on Hejun's life had been traced back to a rival organization that his team had handled with quiet, thorough efficiency she chose not to ask too many questions about. Seoul was golden in December and she had exactly 9 days. They spent them badly. Which is to say they spent them extremely well, in all the ways that mattered. He took her to the fish market at 5 a.m. on a Tuesday because she had said once, in passing, that she loved mornings, and she found him waiting downstairs with coffee and the casual confidence of someone who had not considered she might say no. She hadn't said no. The market was extraordinary, raw and loud and full of life, color everywhere, the cold air smelling of the ocean, and she walked through it with her fingers wrapped in his and felt so remarkably happy that it was almost frightening. She took him to a tiny Ghanaian restaurant she'd found in Yongsan, run by a woman from Kumasi who had come to Korea for love and stayed for reasons she found too complicated to summarize, and watched his face as he ate jollof rice for the first time with the seriousness of a man taking an important test. "Well?" she demanded. He considered. "It's extraordinary." "Obviously. It's also better than any rice I've ever made." "That's not a high bar, Hejun. You eat in restaurants every night." "I can cook." "Can you?" "I will prove this to you." He did, 2 days later, in his kitchen, and the result was genuinely impressive and she told him so and watched him try not to look pleased and fail. They argued, pleasantly, with the enjoyment of 2 people who were evenly matched and knew it, about everything from the best music to whether her conviction that mornings were better than evenings represented a fundamental character flaw. He was a night person. She was a dawn person. They met somewhere in the middle that felt exactly right. On the 6th of the 9 days, she woke up in his apartment and lay very still for a moment before she acknowledged what she was thinking. She was thinking about staying. Not permanently. She had a career, a commission, obligations she honored because they were part of who she was. But she was thinking about the difference between leaving and having to leave, and she was thinking about what it might look like to not have that difference. She was also thinking about the fact that she hadn't told him about the new posting. Her commanding officer had confirmed it 3 days before she'd flown to Seoul. A promotion, significant, deserved, a role she had worked toward for years. It was based in Washington, D.C. The other side of the world. She had been planning to tell him. She would tell him. She just kept finding other moments. Better moments. Moments that didn't require the conversation she wasn't ready to have yet. She was an idiot. She got up, made coffee in his kitchen while he slept, and stood at the window looking at Seoul waking up below her. Her phone buzzed. Her commanding officer, deployment orders adjusted. Report to DC in 5 days, not 9. Confirm receipt. She stared at the screen. 5 days. She confirmed receipt, set her phone face down on the counter, and drank her coffee and thought about how the universe had a timing problem. "You're thinking loudly," said Hejun from the doorway. She turned. He was in a t-shirt and the soft-looking sleep pants that she had catalogued with great appreciation and was pretending she hadn't, and he had the unstyled, early-morning version of himself that she had come to understand was the real one, less armor, more actual person. "I have news," she said. He crossed to the counter, poured his own coffee, leaned against the counter beside her with their arms touching. "Tell me." She told him. The promotion, the posting, the adjusted timeline. She said it plainly, the way she said hard things, looking at him, no softening, no performance. When she finished, he was quiet. "DC, he said. "Yes." "In 5 days." "Yes." He looked at his coffee. She watched his profile, the jaw, the set of his mouth, the thing he was deciding. "Congratulations," he said. And he meant it, she could hear it, the real pride in his voice, clean of anything complicated. "It's deserved. You don't know my file that well." "I know you." He met her eyes. "It's deserved." She exhaled. "Hejun. I'm not going to ask you to stay." "I know. And I'm not," he paused, choosing. "I'm not going to do what I did before." Something in her chest cracked open, quietly. "I want to say something," he said, "and I need you to let me finish it." "Okay." He turned to face her fully. In the morning light, soul soft and bright behind him, he looked like himself, all of himself, not the parts he usually permitted. "I was a fool before," he said. "I have been correcting it for the last week and a half, and I intend to keep correcting it, regardless of the number of miles between us, for as long as you'll let me." He paused. "I don't have a clean offer. My life is not clean. But I am very certain about you, and I am very good at managing complications, and I would very much like to know if you're certain too." The morning light fell between them. "I'm certain," she said. He exhaled, the same sound she had heard in the gala corridor, the release of something held too long. She put down her coffee and stepped into him, and his arms went around her, and Soul hummed outside the window, and she thought, 5 days. We have 5 days. It would have to be enough. It wasn't. 5 days was not enough. It was also the best 5 days of her life, which was information she kept to herself on the grounds that it was overwhelming and she was managing. He took a day off. She wasn't sure he had ever taken a day off in his adult life, and she told him so, and he said, with perfect composure, "I took Sundays off in 2019, and she had laughed so hard she'd gotten a stitch in her side. They walked through Bukhan Hanok village in the pale December sun, her arm hooked through his, talking about nothing and everything. He bought her roasted chestnuts from a street vendor and she ate them without grace and without caring. She took a photo of him when he wasn't looking, sharp profile, city behind him, the rare expression of someone who had put down a weight they'd been carrying, and he caught her doing it and she didn't delete it. On the last evening, she cooked. In his kitchen, with ingredients she'd sourced from the Kumasi Women's Restaurant in Yongsan and one extremely cooperative Korean supermarket. She made kontamaya stew and rice and told him the story of learning it from her grandmother in a kitchen that always smelled of palm oil and wood smoke. He sat on the counter and listened like she was telling him something important, which she was. She said, Adwoa told him, stirring with focused attention, that a woman who can feed people has power. Not the kind that takes, the kind that makes people stay. She was right, he said. She glanced at him. He was watching her with that expression again. The full one. "Don't look at me like that," she said. "Like what?" "Like I'm a problem you're solving." "I look at you," he said, carefully, "like you're the solution." She pointed the wooden spoon at him. That was an extremely good line. "I've been saving it." She laughed, and turned back to the stove, and felt him move from the counter to stand behind her, close, warm, his chin finding the top of her head. "I'm going to miss this kitchen," she said. "The kitchen. And the person in it." His arms came around her from behind, lightly, and she let herself lean back into him and they stood there while the stew bubbled and Soul got dark outside the window and neither of them said the thing they were both thinking. She was going to be halfway across the world in 17 hours. They had eaten dinner with the specific deliberateness of people who are paying attention to every bite. At 11 p.m. she had packed her bag, which was a small and efficient process that he watched from the doorway with his arms crossed and his composure doing most of the work for him. "I'll call," she said. "I know. Time zones are inconvenient but manageable. I know. And DC is," she did a mental calculation, "a 14-hour flight from Seoul, which is a 2 hour." He pushed off the door frame and crossed the room and took her face in his hands, and she stopped talking. His thumb traced her cheek. His eyes were doing the thing. "I know." She covered his hands with hers. "I'll call," she said again, quieter. "I know," he said. "And I will answer." She kissed him, slower this time, the kind of kiss that was a promise inside a promise, and when they pulled back his forehead rested against hers and they both breathed for a moment in the small space between leaving and gone. "Jeon Hae-joon," she said. Don't make me send another 2:47 a.m. message." He laughed, soft and warm, into her hair. "Never again," he said. Her car came at midnight. He walked her down. He stood on the pavement with his hands in his pockets while she got in, and she rolled down the window, and he looked at her the way he had looked at her across a ballroom 3 years ago, like she was the only fixed point. 2 months, she said. "I have leave in 2 months. I'll find a very good restaurant." "You'd better." The car pulled away. She looked back once. He was still standing there, watching, a tall dark shape against the lit-up city. She faced forward and breathed and told herself, very firmly, that she was fine. She was, objectively, not fine. She was also, for the first time in 3 years, entirely certain about something. Her phone buzzed. A message from Hae-joon, "Safe flight." Then, 3 seconds later, "And for the record, I should have answered at 2:47. She smiled at her phone in the backseat of the car, Seoul's lights scrolling past outside. She typed back, "You're going to spend a very long time making it up to me." His reply came instantly, "I know. I'm looking forward to it," and she was still smiling when her phone buzzed again, this time with a different notification. A news alert. She almost didn't read it. It was nearly midnight, she was exhausted, she had a flight in 6 hours. She read it. Her blood went cold. The headline, "Joint Korean-American Task Force announces major organized crime operation, high-value targets identified in Seoul." And beneath it, in the briefing document she could access with her security clearance and immediately wished she couldn't. A photograph. Jeon Hae-joon. Name, network, assets, all documented. All confirmed. The operation she had had absolutely no idea was running. The operation that had apparently been building for 2 years. Estimated arrest timeline, 48 to 72 hours. She stared at the screen. The car kept moving. Seoul kept glittering. She had 48 to 72 hours before the man she had just kissed goodbye was in the custody of a joint task force that she was, technically, professionally, by the flag she served, on the same side as. Her hand was already reaching for the door handle. Her brain was already 3 moves ahead, doing what it always did, calculating, assessing, deciding. "This is not your problem," said the part of her brain that had spent years learning which lines not to cross. "He doesn't know," said the rest of her. Her phone buzzed again. "Hae-joon, a 2 hour. Something just came through on my end. Something significant. I need you to." The message stopped. Unfinished. Then, "Are you still in the car?" She looked at the screen. She looked at the city outside the window. She thought about 2:47 a.m. and a message he hadn't answered, and a man standing on a pavement watching her leave, and a promise made 3 years late that she wasn't willing to let get broken again. "Pull over," she told the driver. "To be continued in part 2. If this story wrecked you, good. That means it's working. Part 2 is coming and you are not ready. Subscribe so you don't miss it, smash that like button if you need to know what Adwoa does next, and drop in the comments, team she goes back for him or team she follows orders? I need to know where you stand. See you in part 2.